Welcome to part 2 of the series of Agile videos. This part is about how do you actually do Agile, different ways of being Agile or doing Agile. So starting out without any jargon, just talking about the pieces that make up an Agile way of working. What are those? Well, start by having a long-term prioritized plan for what you want to do, what do you want to accomplish. Break that down into smaller pieces and create a short-term plan for the next few weeks or some shorter time period. Every day, or at least often, the people working together on doing this, you meet up to share knowledge, support each other in making progress, and identify and remove blockers, so you make sure that you continuously progress. At the end of these few weeks, stop and compare or review what your plan was for this period and compare the plan to what really happened, what got actually done. At the end of the few weeks, also stop to reflect or retrospect on your way of working and challenge yourself to improve continuously. In order to get things done, you need to allow individuals and teams time to focus. So having some time periods that they can focus on one thing to get it done is super important. Allow the transparency to enable informed decision making in your process. And if you're producing something, if you're building something, try to form a team of all, or at least as many as is feasible, of the competencies needed to take an idea to something that's actually built, put all of those competencies in the same team. So that was the generic approach to what an Agile way of working is. And this now has been implemented in many different frameworks. And for those of you who saw the Agile history lesson, I mentioned Scrum as being one of the most important ones. So therefore I'll spend a little bit of time explaining Scrum to you. This is something that you can, of course, go to professional trainings to do. Something I used to deliver for 2 days to train people on how to use Scrum in a good way. But Scrum basically starts from a plan, both a long-term plan, a product backlog, and a short-term plan, a sprint backlog. That are the artifacts that tell you what we want to accomplish, long-term and short-term. From the short-term plan, we start by doing an iteration or a sprint, which is a 2 to 4 week time period where we work on delivering what we said we wanted to accomplish in this sprint, this time period. Each day, the team, the development team, it's as it's called in Scrum, consisting of these different competencies, meet up to do all the things I mentioned in the previous slide. Try to identify issues that is stopping progress, support each other, knowledge sharing, and micro-planning if something needs to be adjusted on the day-to-day level. Scrum also identified 2 other important roles, the product owner being the one who has responsibility for making sure the requirements are there and the priorities are there. What do we want to build and in what order? And the Scrum Master is a specific role identified in Scrum as a coach, as a leader of the continuous improvement, helping the others do their jobs better and better. So the big circle in this picture illustrates this sprint, this 2 to 4 week period, and the smaller circle is the daily meeting, the daily Scrum that drives this multiple week long period forward. At the end of the sprint, you have a review where you look at what you have built and compared it to the plan. And you have a retrospective where you talk about how you're doing things and try to improve. So pretty much a very simple framework that doesn't solve everything, obviously, but it is super powerful in its simplicity because you have to add things to it that are specific to your environment. But you can start from this simple framework in almost any environment. So this is in no way limited to, for example, software only, where it came from. but I've done this in management teams, hardware teams, chemists, you name it. It is applicable at least in many different scenarios, but very incomplete, very simplistic. So you have to add things to it. And this was made intentionally by the creators of Scrum. Kanban is something that comes from the lean world, and basically Kanban is the board where you illustrate what you are doing and tasks that have different states. So for example, in this case we have things that are on the backlog, things that we are actually doing right now, things that are being reviewed by someone before we can release it, and things that are actually done and released, for example. And this is something that the columns can be whatever is applicable to your process, but the purpose here is about visualizing what you're doing, maximizing flow through the system. So you typically want to put limiters on these columns so you can't have everything in doing and nothing getting reviewed, for example. You want to limit how much is being done at the same time to make sure that things flow from left to right. Again, a very simplistic framework, but can help a lot with getting things to done rather than in progress. Contrasting these two very small frameworks with something a lot bigger and more complex, I'm illustrating this by showing you this picture of the Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFe. This is the version 6.0, and if you look at this, you can see near the bottom left corner, you can see both Kanban and Scrum. So both of these are included as building blocks in the SAFe framework. And that is basically how the SAFe framework is built up. They've taken a lot of different building blocks from the Agile community, put it all into the same picture, and tried to create a coherent picture for a whole enterprise, or even a whole government organization. This has been very popular in many big organizations because it's appearing as being very complete and very thought through and very applicable to anyone. To some extent I would agree, but there are, as always of course, challenges with finding something this complex and implement it exactly in your organization, because your organization will also be complex in its own ways. So finding a perfect match isn't always doable. But learning from this framework or looking at the ideas they have found and implementing many of them can typically be a very good idea for your big enterprise. But as I mentioned, Agile ways of working is not only for software. It came from that, but it's very applicable to many other things. And just to show that, I wanted to show you this MAD, or MAD maybe, Modified Agile for Hardware Development. They've changed a little bit on some details, but it's very little change when you dive into it and try to understand exactly what they're doing. It is very much the same thing. There are some limitations when you work with hardware. It takes a little bit longer to build things together from the parts to build a whole, but overall more similar than different. So just to sort of belinger that point a little bit, there are many different Agile ways of working out there, or Agile methods. So many things are in the Agile family these days, but they come from the same ideas of minimizing upfront planning, maximizing output of value. That is basically the idea of all of these things. If you were to start somewhere today, I would start by looking at modern Agile, because I think this is a very interesting idea, a very interesting framework, where they talk not only about delivering value continuously, about experimenting and learning rapidly, but also about the psychological things that makes people comfortable and productive in your organization. Making safety a prerequisite, making people awesome by feeling that they contribute in a meaningful way. Which method is the best one for me? Well, as Ken Schwaber, one of the Scrum co-creators, typically likes to say, it depends. Because your organization will have its unique requirements. So it's hard to say exactly which is the best. You need to learn a little bit about the different options out there and compare to what problems you see in your organization before choosing to implement something. I also want to mention this combination of planable and unplannable work that is the reality for most teams out there that has to maintain something that's already out with customers at the same time as they're trying to build new things. So this picture illustrates a simple backlog for a team which has an added priority lane at the top. So at the start, if we make this example simple by saying we're using Scrum, we make a plan for what we're going to do over the next few weeks. But based on our history, we allocate only as much time as we think we will have for plannable work when we make the plan for the next few weeks. So say that we typically have to dedicate 20% of our time to fixing things for our customers. Well, then only 80% of our time should be allowed to be planned for the plannable work. So that's planned and put up on the board under the backlog. But then when emergency things come in, like emergency fixes, urgent requests from the organization or customers or something, those can be handled more according to the Kanban methodology in this top lane. So where you focus on the highest priority item first and get it done, and then you tackle the next one. So you combine these two methodologies under for the same team, maybe even using the same board, but with these different lanes where you have different ways of approaching it. Sounds a little bit simple, but it works surprisingly well for many teams. And if nothing else, this way of approaching it will make issues that you have in your organization very visible. So for example, if the team is continuously dragged down by this priority lane, they never get the plannable work done, maybe you need to look into why that is. Why do you have so many emergency issues all the time? I wanted to end this section with some book recommendations. These are quite old books, but these are the golden start for these areas. Start by reading these and then move on to other more modern things. Thank you and bye for now.